afternoon or morning, my good friends, wherever you are. Today we're going to continue our journey through the Bible. If you were not with us before, you remember that in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, God sets up the facts that we have a great need, and our need is we're sinners and we need redemption. Beginning in chapter 12, God makes a covenant with Abraham in which he promises him a nation, a land, and that through him he will send a savior, a king, one who will redeem and take care of our sin problems. So we talked about Abraham, and then we talked about when Abraham died, he had only one son. Now God, you promised him descendants like the stars and like the sand of the sea. He only got one kid. But God is faithful, and to that son Isaac, God gave two sons. But he chose the younger. So now we still have just one person with the promise. Jacob he was a slimy fella, but God redeemed him, and through some hard times he came to be a true worshiper of God. Now Jacob had 12 sons. Now we're getting somewhere. Now we have some people. So what's going to happen now? These 12 sons, out of these 12, God chose one through whom he would send the Savior. It wasn't the oldest. God doesn't ever do what we expect him to do in choosing people. So he chose one of them through whom he would send the Savior. And then there was another son named Joseph who was a dreamer. His brothers didn't like his dreams, so they kidnapped him and sold him into Egypt, where God had a plan there also. God had told Abraham in Genesis 15, I'll read a couple verses here, when God makes the covenant with Abraham, he tells him, know for certain, Genesis 15:13, then the Lord said to him, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. That was God's promise to Abraham. Now, we don't want to hear that our children are going to be slaves. But Abraham trusted God so much, we have no indication that he ever complained about that. So Joseph was down in Egypt, and everywhere Joseph went, God blessed him and blessed the people around him. That's the way we ought to be. We ought to be blessing to people and be a blessing ourselves. So after some years, Joseph had been elevated from being a slave to actually being Pharaoh's right-hand man. And there was a great famine in the whole country, the whole region. And so Jacob's sons, that is Israel's sons, went down to Egypt so they could eat for the food. And they did. They stayed there for 400 years, just like God had said. But what's happening during that 400 years is not just that we're a bunch of slaves, but also God is working to build the population of this people. So God had promised Abraham descendants as the stars in the sand. So when they came out of Egypt, they came out with over 3 million people. They went down with 70 to Egypt. And there they were slaves in Egypt for 400 years. But when they came out a great nation. So we might even say Egypt was the womb that grew the nation into its power. Well, after 400 years, of slavery, the Lord raised up another man, Moses. And Moses came to Pharaoh and said, Pharaoh, God says to you, let my people go that they can worship me. Pharaoh said, no. Who is this God? So God introduced himself through the 10 plagues, the 9 plagues. And every one of those plagues was a judgment against a god of Egypt, until finally it came to the 10th one, which was the death of the firstborn. And in that one, the Pharaoh himself believed that he was a god and that his oldest son was therefore a god. So that was a judgment against the final god of Egypt. And we're going to pick that up next time and talk more about it.